Before I reveal these 3 secrets, let me ask you a question. Have you ever noticed how the most successful people you know seem to have this quiet confidence about them? They don't broadcast everything. They're selective about what they share with the world. That's not by accident. That's wisdom in action. The first thing that wise people keep private is their accomplishments. Yes, their accomplishments. Isn't that interesting? Most people can't wait to tell everyone about their achievements. They post it on social media. They bring it up in conversations. They find ways to let everyone know what they've done. But truly wise individuals understand that there's an art to humility. You see, when you constantly talk about your accomplishments, a few things happen. First, you create unnecessary jealousy and resentment. Human nature is complex, and not everyone will celebrate your success with you. Some will smile to your face but harbor envy in their hearts. Why invite that energy into your life? Second, when you're always talking about what you've achieved, you're living in the past. Success isn't what you did yesterday. It's what you're doing today and what you're planning to do tomorrow. Wise people know that dwelling on past accomplishments can create complacency, and complacency is the enemy of growth. Third, and perhaps most importantly, wise people understand that real accomplishment doesn't need announcement. As I often say, the walls that protect your values will never be painted with billboards. Your success will speak for itself. People will notice. They'll see the changes in your life, in your demeanor, and your influence. You don't need to point it out. I remember a gentleman I met years ago. He was one of the wealthiest men in his state, owned several successful businesses, and had influenced public policy in significant ways. But you'd never know it talking to him. He drove a modest car, lived in a comfortable but not extravagant home, and spent most of our conversation asking me about my work and my ideas. It wasn't until months later that I learned about his accomplishments from others. That's wisdom. Now, does this mean you should never celebrate your victories? Of course not. Celebration is essential. Share your joys with your closest circle, your family, your mentors, your dearest friends. But be selective. Don't make the announcement of your achievements part of your identity. Let me share something personal with you. Early in my career, I made this mistake. I had achieved some success, and I wanted everyone to know it. I thought it would gain me respect and admiration. What I discovered was that it created distance. It made me less relatable. It didn't serve me, and it didn't serve others. That was a valuable lesson. The second thing that wise people keep private is their good deeds. This might surprise you. After all, though we need more kindness and generosity in the world, absolutely. But wise people understand that there's a difference between doing good and showcasing your goodness. When you perform acts of kindness with the expectation of recognition, you diminish the purity of the act. You're not giving solely for the benefit of others. You're giving for what you'll receive in return: praise, recognition, a reputation for generosity. That's not genuine giving. That's a transaction. Wise people give in secret whenever possible. They understand that the greatest satisfaction comes not from the acknowledgement of others, but from knowing they've made a difference. They don't need witnesses to validate their goodness. Their character isn't dependent on public perception. There's a beautiful concept in many spiritual traditions about giving anonymously, where your left hand doesn't know what your right hand is doing. This isn't just poetic language, it's profound wisdom. When you give without recognition, you free yourself from the need for external validation. Your goodness becomes part of who you are, not just what you do for show. I once heard about a wealthy businessman who for decades had been anonymously paying college tuition for deserving students from low-income backgrounds. Hundreds of young people received educations they couldn't otherwise afford, and none of them knew their benefactor. His identity only came to light after his passing, when his will revealed the establishment of a foundation to continue this work. He never needed the recognition. The impact was enough. Now, am I suggesting you should never accept thanks or acknowledgement when you help others? Not at all. Gratitude is a beautiful thing, and allowing others to express it can be part of their growth. But there's a difference between graciously accepting thanks and actively seeking praise. Wise people understand this distinction. If you're doing good deeds primarily for recognition, I encourage you to examine your motivations. True fulfillment comes from the act itself, not from the applause that might follow. As I often tell my audiences, don't mistake the applause for the accomplishment. The real accomplishment is the difference you make, not the recognition you receive. The third thing that wise people keep private is their next move, their plans, their strategies. In a world obsessed with sharing every detail, wise people understand the power of strategic silence. When you broadcast your plans before they're realized, several things happen. First, you give away your competitive advantage. In business, in investments, even in personal development, there's value in being the first or being unique. When you tell everyone what you're going to do, you invite competition and sometimes even imitation. Second, talking about your plans triggers a psychological phenomenon that's fascinating. When you tell someone about your goals, your brain can experience a sense of satisfaction similar to what you'd feel if you'd actually achieved the goal. It's like your mind gets tricked into thinking the work is already done, and that can reduce your motivation to actually do the work. Third, by keeping your plans private, you protect yourself from unnecessary criticism and negativity. Not everyone will understand your vision. Not everyone will believe in your ability to achieve it. And their doubt can plant seeds of doubt within you. Why expose yourself to that before you need to? I remember a conversation with a young entrepreneur who was developing a revolutionary product. He'd tell anyone who would listen about his ideas, timeline, his marketing strategy. One day I pulled him aside and asked, "Do you know who else is hearing all these details?" "Your potential competitors, your critics, people who might not have your best interests at heart." That was a wake-up call for him. He learned to be more selective about what he shared and with whom. Now, this doesn't mean you operate in complete isolation. Every great achievement requires collaboration, feedback, and support. But be intentional about who you bring into your confidence. Share your vision with those who have earned your trust, those who have the expertise to guide you, those who genuinely want to see you succeed. As I often say, work harder on yourself than you do on your job. Part of that personal work is developing the wisdom to know when to speak and when to remain silent. It's about understanding the power of privacy in a world that values publicity. These three areas, accomplishments, good deeds, and future plans, represent aspects of life where privacy serves wisdom. But let's go deeper. Let's examine why this wisdom matters and how it can transform your life. You see, at the heart of these practices is a profound understanding of human nature and personal power. When you don't need constant external validation, when your sense of worth isn't dependent on others' recognition, you possess a freedom that few experience. You're operating from a place of internal strength rather than external approval. This internal locus of control is a hallmark of successful individuals. They understand that while they can't control all external circumstances, they can control their responses, their attitudes, and their actions. By keeping certain aspects of their lives private, they're exercising this control. They're choosing what influences they allow in and what energy they put out. There's also tremendous power in mystery. When you don't reveal everything about yourself, you create a certain depth that people are drawn to. Think about the people you most admire. I'd wager they maintain some level of privacy. They don't feel the need to expose every aspect of their lives. There's something compelling about that restraint. In our digital age, this wisdom becomes even more valuable. We're encouraged to share everything, to document every achievement, every act of kindness, every plan for the future. The platforms we use are designed to reward this sharing with likes, comments, followers, external validation made visible and quantifiable. But wise people recognize the hollowness of this validation. They understand that true worth isn't measured in followers or likes. It's measured in impact, in personal growth, in the lives you touch in meaningful ways, whether anyone else knows about it or not. I want to emphasize something important here. This isn't about being secretive for the sake of secrecy. It's not about being mysterious just to appear wise. It's about understanding the value of discretion and using it to protect what's precious, your peace of mind, your genuine relationships, your competitive edge, your future possibilities. Let me share a personal observation. Over the decades, I've noticed that the people who talk the most about what they're going to do often accomplish the least. Conversely, those who quietly go about their work, focusing on excellence rather than announcement, tend to achieve the most remarkable results. It's not a coincidence. There's a direct relationship between conservation of energy and concentration of power. When you're not expending energy seeking approval or talking about what you're going to do, you have more energy to actually do it. When you're not distracted by others' opinions about your plans, you can focus with greater clarity on execution. This is why wise people keep certain things private. It's not about secrecy, it's about effectiveness. Now, you might be wondering, if wise people keep these things secret, how do we know about them? How do they become known for their wisdom and success? That's an excellent question, and it points to an important distinction. Wise people don't hide who they are, they simply don't showcase everything they do. Their character, their values, their expertise, these are visible for all to see. They share their knowledge generously. They offer guidance to those who seek it. They contribute to conversations in meaningful ways, but they do all this without needing to establish their credentials at every turn, without needing to remind everyone of their past successes, without needing to announce their charitable works, without revealing their strategic plans before the time is right. As a result, they earn something far more valuable than momentary attention. They earn respect. They earn trust. They earn influence. And these are currencies that don't depreciate with time. I want to challenge you to examine your own relationship with privacy. In what areas of your life might you be sharing too much, too soon? Where might you be seeking external validation when you should be focusing on internal growth? How might your effectiveness increase if you were more selective about what you reveal and when? Consider your social media presence if you have one. Are you sharing accomplishments to inspire others, or are you seeking validation? Are you documenting acts of kindness to encourage others to give, or are you looking for recognition? Are you discussing your plans to gain helpful input, or are you just trying to impress? These are tough questions, and they require honest self-reflection. But that's what personal development is all about, having the courage to examine your motivations and adjust your actions accordingly. Now let's talk about implementation. How do you begin to cultivate this wisdom in your own life? How do you practice healthy privacy without becoming withdrawn or secretive? I have a few suggestions. First, develop a strong inner circle. These are the people with whom you can share freely your accomplishments, your charitable works, your future plans. They're the ones who will celebrate with you without jealousy, offer guidance without judgment, and support you without expecting anything in return. This inner circle might be small, perhaps just a few trusted individuals, but their presence in your life allows you to be open where it matters most while maintaining privacy in broader contexts. Second, practice mindful sharing. Before you post something online, before you bring up an achievement in conversation, before you talk about your charitable contributions, pause and ask yourself, why am I sharing this? Who will benefit? Is this the right time and place? This simple practice can help you become more intentional about what you reveal and why. Third, focus on adding value rather than proving value. When your primary concern is how you can contribute to a situation, a relationship, or a conversation, you naturally become less focused on showcasing your own worth. You ask better questions, you listen more attentively, you offer insights that truly serve others. And ironically, this service-oriented approach typically results in greater recognition of your value than any amount of self-promotion could achieve. Fourth, celebrate progress privately before achievement publicly. When you reach a milestone on the way to a larger goal, take time to acknowledge it yourself. Feel the satisfaction, journal about it, share it with your inner circle, but be cautious about broader announcements until you've reached the ultimate objective. This protects both your competitive advantage and your motivation. Fifth, find satisfaction in anonymous contribution. Challenge yourself to perform acts of kindness that no one will ever trace back to you. Experience the pure joy of giving without recognition. This practice helps you develop generosity as a character trait rather than a public persona. Sixth, become comfortable with people not knowing everything about you. In a world that pressures us to reveal all, there's something powerful about maintaining some privacy. Not in a secretive or suspicious way, but in a way that honors the depth and complexity of who you are. Not everything needs to be shared. Not every thought needs to be expressed. Not every achievement needs to be announced. As you implement these practices, you'll likely notice some interesting changes. You might find that you're less affected by others' opinions of you because your sense of worth isn't dependent on their validation. You might discover that your words carry more weight because you're more selective about when and how you speak. You might experience greater focus and effectiveness because you're not constantly seeking approval or defending your plans. But perhaps most significantly, you might find that your relationships deepen. When you're not using interactions as opportunities for self-promotion, you create space for genuine connection. When you're not constantly seeking validation, you can be more present with others. When you're selective about what you share, the things you do share carry more meaning. I've observed this transformation in countless individuals over the years. There's a maturity, a quiet confidence that develops when someone embraces this wisdom. They become less reactive to criticism, less dependent on praise, more focused on contribution than recognition. They develop what I call sustained significance, influence that doesn't fluctuate with public opinion but grows steadily through consistent, value-driven action. Now, I want to address a potential misunderstanding. Some might hear this message and think I'm advocating for false modesty or strategic manipulation. Nothing could be further from the truth. This isn't about pretending to be less than you are or playing games with information. It's about genuine humility, thoughtful discernment, and strategic focus. True humility isn't thinking less of yourself, it's thinking of yourself less. It's recognizing your achievements without needing everyone else to recognize them too. It's understanding your worth without requiring constant external confirmation of that worth. Thoughtful discernment means being intentional about what you share, when you share it, and with whom you share it. It's about understanding the impact of your words and choosing them wisely. Strategic focus means directing your energy toward achievement rather than announcement. It's about doing the work rather than talking about the work. These qualities, humility, discernment, focus, are foundational to success in any area of life. They're also increasingly rare in our culture of constant sharing and self-promotion. And that creates opportunity. When others are busy seeking attention, you can be busy creating value. When others are distracted by the need for validation, you can be focused on innovation. When others are revealing their strategies prematurely, you can be perfecting yours before unveiling them. Let me share an observation from my business experience. I've noticed that companies that operate with this wisdom often outperform their more vocal competitors. They don't telegraph every move. They don't reveal their strategies before implementation. They don't boast about every success. Instead, they focus on excellence, on customer service, on innovation. And their results speak volumes. The same principle applies to individuals. Those who focus more on substance and on show, on contribution than on credit, on action than on announcement, typically achieve more lasting success. They may not make the most noise, but they make the most difference. I want to challenge you to embrace this wisdom in your own life, to become more selective about what you share, to find satisfaction in private progress rather than public praise, to derive joy from anonymous giving, to protect your plans until the time is right for revelation. This isn't about becoming secretive or withdrawn. It's about becoming intentional and wise. It's about understanding the power of privacy in a world that undervalues it. It's about recognizing that not everything needs an audience to be valuable. As you cultivate this wisdom, you may notice that your influence grows even as your need for attention diminishes. You may find that your words carry more weight because they're chosen more carefully. You may discover that your achievements multiply because your energy is focused on creation rather than validation. This is the paradox of privacy in a public world. Those who need it least often receive it most. Those who can thrive without constant validation often attract the greatest respect. Those who can work quietly often make the loudest impact. I encourage you to reflect on these 3 secrets of wise people, keeping private your accomplishments, your good deeds, and your next moves. Consider how implementing this wisdom might change your approach to social media, to conversations, to your work, to your charitable giving, to your future planning. But remember, this isn't about adopting a formula. It's about developing wisdom. And wisdom is always contextual. There will be times when sharing achievements serves a greater purpose than keeping it private. Perhaps it will genuinely inspire others or establish the credibility needed for important work. There will be occasions when making your charitable work known will motivate others to give as well. There will be situations where discussing your plans openly will attract the collaborative resources you need. The key is discernment, knowing when to speak and when to remain silent. Knowing when revelation serves a purpose greater than yourself and when privacy better serves your purpose in others. As you develop this discernment, you join a tradition of wisdom that spans cultures and centuries. From ancient philosophical traditions that valued measured speech to modern successful individuals who operate with strategic discretion, this wisdom has stood the test of time. And in our age of oversharing, it may be more valuable than ever. I want to leave you with a thought that has guided me throughout my career. Your impact in the world is not measured by how much attention you attract, but by how much value you create. It's not about how many people know your name, but about how many lives are better because of your contribution. It's not about visibility, it's about significance. Wise people understand this distinction. They focus on significance over visibility, on contribution over credit, on substance over show. And as a result, they often achieve both, creating genuine value that eventually leads to well-deserved recognition. I encourage you to embrace this wisdom in your own life, to become more intentional about what you share and why, to find satisfaction in private progress and anonymous giving, to protect your plans until the time is right for revelation, to focus more on creating value than on seeking validation. As you do, you may discover that your sense of fulfillment deepens, when your satisfaction comes from within rather than from others' recognition. You develop a resilience that can weather any storm of criticism or praise. You become less reactive to others' opinions and more responsive to your own values and vision. You may also find that your relationships transform. When you're not using every interaction as an opportunity for self-promotion, you create space for genuine connection. When you're listening to understand rather than waiting for your chance to impress, you develop deeper insights and stronger bonds. When you're giving without expectation of recognition, you experience the pure joy of contribution. And perhaps most surprisingly, you may notice that your influence grows even as your need for attention diminishes. There's something compelling about a person who doesn't need to prove their worth at every turn. There's something trustworthy about someone who can do good without needing credit. There's something intriguing about an individual who moves strategically rather than broadcasting every intention. This is the quiet power of wisdom in action. It doesn't demand attention, it earns respect. It doesn't seek followers, it creates leaders. It doesn't chase trends, it establishes standards. I've seen this transformation in countless individuals over the years, from business leaders to teachers, from parents to community organizers. As they've embraced this wisdom, they've become more effective in their work, more authentic in their relationships, more fulfilled in their achievements. I believe the same transformation is possible for you. Not overnight, but over time as you practice these principles consistently. As you become more selective about what you share. As you find joy in anonymous giving. As you protect your plans until the time is right for revelation. This journey toward wisdom isn't always easy. Our culture constantly pulls in the opposite direction, encouraging us to share everything, to seek validation at every turn, to announce plans before they're realized. Resisting these pressures requires intention and courage. But the rewards of this resistance are profound. You develop an internal strength that isn't dependent on external validation. You create space for deeper thought and more meaningful action. You establish a reputation for substance rather than show. You build influence based on wisdom rather than volume. In a world increasingly shaped by those who make the most noise, there's remarkable power in thoughtful silence. Not the silence of disengagement or fear, but the strategic silence of wise discretion. Knowing when to speak and when to listen. Knowing what to reveal and what to protect. Knowing how to add value without needing to prove value. This is the path of wisdom. It's not always the most visible path, but it's often the most valuable. It doesn't always lead to immediate recognition, but it typically leads to lasting impact. It may not attract the most attention in the moment, but it usually creates the most significant legacy over time. I encourage you to embrace this wisdom in your own life, to become more intentional about what you share and why. To find satisfaction in private progress rather than public praise. To derive joy from anonymous giving. To protect your plans until the time is right for revelation. As you do, you join a tradition of wisdom that spans cultures and centuries. You align yourself with those who understand that true power often operates quietly, that genuine influence doesn't demand attention, that lasting impact comes from substance rather than show. This alignment isn't just philosophical, it's practical. When you operate with this wisdom, you waste less energy on validation and invest more in creation. You spend less time managing impressions and more time developing substance. You focus less on how you're perceived and more on what you're producing. The result is typically greater effectiveness, deeper fulfillment, and ultimately more meaningful success. Not the fleeting success of momentary attention, but the lasting success of significant contribution. I want to challenge you to take this wisdom into your daily life. The next time you achieve something noteworthy, pause before sharing it broadly. Consider whether it needs to be announced or whether its impact speaks for itself. The next time you perform an act of kindness, resist the urge to document it for others' approval. Experience the pure joy of giving without recognition. The next time you develop an exciting plan, be selective about who you confide in. Protect your vision until it's ready for broader revelation. These small shifts in behavior can lead to profound changes in your experience and your impact. They represent wisdom in action, not just understanding these principles intellectually, but applying them practically in your daily choices. And as you apply them, watch what happens. Notice how your focus sharpens when you're not constantly seeking validation. Observe how your relationships deepen when you're not using them as platforms for self-promotion. Pay attention to how your effectiveness increases when you protect your plans from premature exposure and criticism. These observations will reinforce the value of this wisdom and encourage its continued application. You'll see firsthand that what wise people keep private isn't kept private out of fear or insecurity, but out of strategic understanding and genuine fidelity. This understanding and humility aren't weaknesses, they're strengths. They don't diminish your impact, they enhance it. They don't reduce your influence, they concentrate it. They don't limit your success, they sustain it. In a culture that often confuses attention with achievement, visibility with value, and noise with impact, this wisdom offers a different path. A path that prioritizes substance over show, contribution over credit, significance over visibility. A path that leads not just to success as commonly defined, but to success as personally experienced, a deep sense of fulfillment, purpose, and meaning. I believe this is the kind of success most of us truly desire. Not just the external trappings of achievement, but the internal experience of knowing our work matters, our contribution is meaningful, our presence makes a difference. This deeper success isn't dependent on others' recognition. It doesn't fluctuate with public opinion. It's not measured in likes or followers or applause. It's measured in lives touched, problem solved, value created. And often the most significant impacts are the ones that happen quietly, without fanfare or public acknowledgement. Think about the people who have most influenced your own life. Was it always those who sought the spotlight? Those who documented every achievement? Those who announced every intention? Or was it often those who simply lived with integrity, worked with excellence, and cared with sincerity, regardless of who was watching or what recognition might follow? In my experience, the most profound influences are rarely the loudest voices. They're the consistent presences, the steady examples, the quiet mentors who focus more on making a difference than making an impression. I encourage you to become this kind of influence in your own sphere, not by seeking attention or demanding recognition, but by creating value consistently. Not by broadcasting every achievement, but by achieving consistently. Not by announcing every act of kindness, but by being consistently kind. Not by revealing every plan, but by executing consistently. This consistency, combined with strategic privacy, creates a powerful presence. A presence that doesn't need to announce itself because its impact is undeniable. A presence that doesn't seek validation because its value is self-evident. A presence that doesn't chase attention because it naturally commands respect. This is the presence of wisdom. And in a world often characterized by superficiality and self-promotion, this wisdom stands out. Not because it demands notice, but because it deserves it. Not because it seeks followers, but because it creates leaders. Not because it chases trends, but because it establishes standards. As you cultivate this wisdom in your own life, becoming more selective about what you share, finding joy in anonymous giving, protecting your plans until the time is right for revelation, you contribute to a countercultural movement. A movement toward greater substance and less show, toward more meaningful contribution and less self-promotion, toward lasting impact rather than momentary attention. This movement may not make headlines, but it makes history. It may not trend on social media, but it transforms societies. It may not attract the most followers, but it influences the most leaders. I invite you to join this movement, to embrace the wisdom that understands the power of privacy in a public world, to recognize that what you keep private can be as significant as what you make public, sometimes even more so. As you do, you align yourself with a tradition of wisdom that spans cultures and centuries. You join ranks with those who understand that true power often operates quietly, that genuine influence doesn't demand attention, that lasting impact comes from substance rather than show. This alignment isn't just philosophical, it's practical. When you operate with this wisdom, you waste less energy on validation and invest more in creation. You spend less time managing impressions and more time developing substance. You focus less on how you're perceived and more on what you're producing. The result is typically greater effectiveness, deeper fulfillment, and ultimately more meaningful success. Not the fleeting success of momentary attention, but the lasting success of significant contribution. I challenge you to embrace this wisdom starting today, to become more intentional about what you share and why, to find satisfaction in private progress rather than public praise, to derive joy from anonymous giving, to protect your plans until the time is right for revelation. These aren't just philosophical principles, they're practical strategies for greater effectiveness and fulfillment. They're not just ideas to consider, they're practices to implement. They're not just concepts to understand, they're wisdom to embody. As you embody this wisdom, you'll likely notice changes in your focus, in your relationships, in your influence, in your fulfillment. You may find that you accomplish more with less drama, that you connect more deeply with less pretense, that you influence more significantly with less self-promotion. These changes represent wisdom in action, not just understanding these principles intellectually, but experiencing their impact practically. They confirm what wise people throughout history have discovered, that there's power in privacy, that there's strength in selectivity, that there's freedom in focusing on contribution rather than credit. In a world that often measures worth by visibility, followers, likes, and shares, this wisdom offers a different metric. It measures worth by impact, by value created, by lives improved, regardless of whether that impact is publicly acknowledged or privately experienced. By this metric, the most valuable contributions aren't always the most visible ones. The most significant influences aren't always the loudest voices. The most important work isn't always done in the spotlight. I encourage you to embrace this alternative metric, to value impact over attention, contribution over credit, significance over visibility. To find satisfaction in making a difference, whether or not that difference is publicly recognized or privately experienced. As you do, you may discover a freedom that few experience in our validation-hungry culture. The freedom to create without needing approval, to give without expecting recognition, to plan without requiring constant feedback, to achieve without demanding applause. This freedom is one of the great rewards of wisdom. It's not the freedom of lawlessness or isolation. It's the freedom of internal strength rather than external dependence. It's the freedom that comes from knowing your worth isn't determined by others' opinions. Your contribution isn't validated by public recognition. Your success isn't measured by momentary attention. I believe this freedom is available to you, not through rebellion against cultural norms or withdrawal from social engagement, but through the thoughtful application of timeless wisdom. Through becoming more intentional about what you share and why. Through finding joy in anonymous giving. Through protecting your plans until the time is right for revelation. These practices aren't about becoming secretive or isolated. They're about becoming strategic and wise. They're about understanding the power of privacy in a public world. They're about recognizing that not everything needs an audience to be valuable. As you cultivate this understanding, you join a lineage of wisdom that spans cultures and centuries. You align yourself with those who recognize that true power often operates quietly, that genuine influence doesn't demand attention, that lasting impact comes from substance rather than show. This alignment isn't just philosophical, it's practical. When you operate with this wisdom, you waste less energy on validation and invest more in creation. You spend less time managing impressions and more time developing substance. You focus less on how you're perceived and more on what you're producing. The result is typically greater effectiveness, deeper fulfillment, and ultimately more meaningful success. Not the fleeting success of momentary attention, but the lasting success of significant contribution. I invite you to embrace this wisdom in your own life, to become more intentional about what you share and why, to find satisfaction in private progress rather than public praise, to derive joy from anonymous giving, to protect your plans until the time is right for revelation. As you do, you may discover that your influence grows even as your need for attention diminishes, that your words carry more weight because they're chosen more carefully, that your achievements multiply because your energy is focused on creation rather than validation. This is the paradox of privacy in a public world. Those who need it least often receive it most. Those who can thrive without constant validation often attract the greatest respect. Those who can work quietly often make the loudest impact. Remember, wise people keep these three things private, not out of fear or insecurity, but out of strategic understanding and genuine humility. They recognize that there's power in discretion, strength in selectivity, and freedom in focusing on contribution rather than credit. By embracing this wisdom, you position yourself for greater effectiveness, deeper fulfillment, and more meaningful success. You align yourself with a tradition that values substance over show, contribution over credit, significance over visibility. And in doing so, you join a countercultural movement toward greater depth and authenticity in a world that often settles for superficiality and self-promotion. This movement may not make headlines, but it makes history. It may not trend on social media, but it transforms societies. It may not attract the most followers, but it influences the most leaders. And by embracing the wisdom at its core, becoming more selective about what you share, finding joy in anonymous giving, protecting your plans until the time is right for revelation, you contribute to its growth and impact. Your contribution matters, not because it's seen by many, but because it affects those it touches. Not because it's recognized publicly, but because it creates value genuinely. Not because it demands attention, but because it deserves respect. This is the quiet power of wisdom in action. It doesn't seek the spotlight, but it illuminates paths. It doesn't chase trends, but it sets standards. It doesn't demand followers, but it creates leaders. And by embracing this wisdom in your own life, you participate in this illumination, this standard setting, this leadership development. I encourage you to start today, to become more intentional about what you share and why, to find satisfaction in private progress rather than public praise, to derive joy from anonymous giving, to protect your plans until the time is right for revelation. These aren't just philosophical principles, they're practical strategies for greater effectiveness and fulfillment. They're not just ideas to consider, they're practices to implement. They're not just concepts to understand, they're wisdom to embody. As you embody this wisdom, you'll likely notice changes in your focus, in your relationships, in your influence, in your fulfillment. You may find that you accomplish more with less drama, that you connect more deeply with less pretense, that you influence more significantly with less self-promotion. These changes represent wisdom in action, not just understanding these principles intellectually, but experiencing their impact practically. They confirm what wise people throughout history have discovered, that there's power in privacy. that there's strength in selectivity, that there's freedom in focusing on contribution rather than credit. In a world increasingly shaped by those who make the most noise, there's remarkable power in thoughtful silence. Not the silence of disengagement or fear, but the strategic silence of wise discretion. Knowing when to speak and when to listen. Knowing what to reveal and what to protect. Knowing how to add value without needing to prove value. This is the path of wisdom. It's not always the most visible path, but it's often the most valuable. It doesn't always lead to immediate recognition, but it typically leads to lasting impact. It may not attract the most attention in the moment, but it usually creates the most significant legacy over time. I invite you to walk this path, to embrace this wisdom, to discover its power in your own life and work, to experience the freedom that comes from internal strength rather than external validation, to create impact that derives from substance rather than show. As you do, you join a tradition of wisdom that spans cultures and centuries. You align yourself with those who understand that true power often operates quietly, that genuine influence doesn't demand attention, that lasting impact comes from substance rather than show.